the real agenda of educating black children?
Are we praying for their betterment? Are we creating that possibility? Are we creating that future? So that's the question. Because I'm going to tell you something. In the 1980s, it was a totally different story. Totally different story. I remember when we had a gentleman run the district that kept one of our first black superintendents, he kept the budget balanced. A lot of times Detroit is getting the reputation is not having people that are as trained as possible to do a great job in terms of moving our young people forward, when in actuality, the teachers in Detroit are some of the best trained teachers anywhere in the state. And just to be able to have a livable wage, you almost have to have a master's degree, because in Detroit, it doesn't pay what other districts pay. In other districts, you make almost $100,000. Here in Detroit, I think they still maybe top out at 70s or 80s. That's a big difference. The conditions dictate that you be very culturally aware in the city, that you be ready to teach in very difficult and adverse circumstances and conditions. So by nature, you have a set of challenges that nobody else quite has. But when I broke in the system in the 80s, I remember we were walking the buildings. I was subbing before I got a contract, and they said, "We need our men." That's what the women were saying. And they backed us up. And we had women that dressed appropriately at work. We had women that were good role models for the young ladies. We had men that did the same thing. And we were very supportive of each other. They were very honest and sincere of the balanced staff concept. The balanced staff concept, to a certain extent, applied to race. No, you don't want all white teachers in front of black children, but it also applies to other things in terms of gender. You want an appropriate amount, not just of women in front of the kids, you need men. Because how else is a boy going to learn to become one?
This is what has been done to all of us, but in particular to our men. Now that leads us to the next subject, I think, and as that, can a black woman, or any woman, raise a boy into being a suitable, proper man? And the answer is no. Over 70% of our black women are single, widowed, separated, or divorced. So that means that over 70% of our men have been raised by women. So it makes you all have the mentality of a woman. Some of y'all stand like a woman. Some of you don't know how to respond in certain situations with other men. It has impacted our entire nationality. There's so much nonsense now. It has changed. So all the more raised, we have women that don't even teach our children manners. They don't even know how to say thank you if they don't learn it in school. And we shouldn't have to turn our children over to the enemy's educational system in order to educate them about how to live out here.
A woman can raise a boy, but a woman can't raise a man. And part of the rearing has to be in our schools and in the workforce. So a lot of that was lost over time. We don't have as many men going to education. We don't have the models that we did. And I'm not saying that we need to see the 80s again, but we do need to see some strong men teaching and leading our buildings for our kids to have an opportunity to be successful. So getting back to what is the real agenda in educating our kids, if it's not to create a greater school to prison pipeline, then we need to think about the factors that we use to determine success. You take something like test scores, for example. They know the test scores in districts and urban areas are going to be lower than other places based upon a lot of factors that have absolutely nothing to do with the student-teacher relationship. Most of the factors that will affect and impact student achievement are outside the building, research will show. And so some of the items are very obvious. You have race. These are social variables. You have income. You have number of books in the house. These are positively correlated with high standardized test scores. Access to health care. The number of times a child is moved, the more times a child is moved, the less their test scores are going to be. That's what's called stability factor. Another factor is food security. If a child can reliably count on getting nutritious, balanced meals, they're going to perform better on matters of standardized achievement and obviously do well in school overall because that child has resources that will allow them to be healthy. A healthier child is a better performing child. And then you also have the level of education of the mother, which kind of stood out to me. I was in an advanced graduate course, and we did a multi-regression analysis of the factors that would predict positive achievement on standardized test scores. And when I saw the education of the mother, I was somewhat baffled. Because being indoctrinated in a European-dominated society, I assumed the father would be the variable. Because if there were a father in the house, the father would be in the lead. But even if their father were in the house, that wasn't necessarily the case. So I raised my hand, asked the professor of the class, I said, why is the woman, why is the education of the mother equated a positive variable for high standardized test achievement? And you know what the professor told me? He said, Whitney, because the child spends most of the time with the mother.
I grew up in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, and I went to what were considered racially desegregated schools. I had a first grade teacher who didn't recognize my academic potential. In fact, I talked with a real slow Southern drawl because I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I got bored with the homework and the schoolwork a lot of times. I would act out. And this teacher sent me to the principal's office several times that year. And in fact, she told my parents that I should be tested for special education. Well, my mama, being the mama she was, said, you ain't testing my child for special education. In fact, if you want to test her for gifted and talented. So I took the test, and as a first grader, I scored on a fourth grade level. And it turns out that I skipped second grade and went from first to third. Now, why am I telling you this story? Why is it even important? Because I believe so many youth like myself have had these kinds of experiences. That teacher did not know what to do with my energy or my intellect. She had labeled me as a child in need of academic remediation when in fact I needed academic challenge. Now, I don't blame her solely for her behaviors. In fact, I think her teacher education program and her professional development as an in-service educator had not prepared her for these new experiences in the 70s of teaching black youth.
So I thought, So I in my mind, I just, it came to me that it's easier for a child, I guess, to overcome a dumb dad than a dumb mother. That's the wrong way of putting it, but yeah, the child spends most time with. So you have a mother, even if, like my grandmother, she did not, I don't even know if she graduated from high school, but my father was very successful, not just athletically, but academically. If they value educational achievement, then that goes back to the thing of, okay, the number of books in the house. Okay, you may not have a lot of books in the house, you may not be afforded. Do you have a library card? And by doing that, encouraging the child to make use of whatever resources are available, that child will do better. My point is that the businesses and corporations and investment groups that are part of building prisons, like Mr. Gilbert has built here, this 2,300 cell facility, they use test scores to determine how many prisons to build. We know that. And so people running our systems, they're aware of this, and apparently a part of the agenda is to make sure things are never equalized.
I went to one school. It was a 21st century building. The students were using robots to plant sustainable agriculture. I went 30 miles down the road, and I went to a building that was 100 years old, no heat or air conditioning, no high-speed internet, and no textbooks. How do we expect the students at the second school to compete with the students at the first school if these inequities exist? It's not fair, and therefore we must provide economic equity to our students. The second type of equity is one that people don't like to discuss much, but that's cultural equity. We know 50% of the students in the United States are students of color, but 80% of the teachers in America are white. We need teachers who look like our students and who value them and the gifts they bring. All students deserve teachers, role models, nurses, paraprofessionals who look like them and value their gifts no matter their race.
Within a building, the greatest factor for standardized test achievement is not necessarily what the instructor does, it's the leadership. So that gets back to the other thing. When we talk about leadership, we're not talking about how many degrees the principal has or anything like that. We're talking about the structure of the building. So now I'm going back to this thing about you got these males, if you got a male running the building, and they're not strong leaders. They don't have structure. They don't have the discipline. They don't have the respect and rapport that they'll need in the community to make that school work. Then that's going to send that kid, that's more like send that kid straight to that facility it's being built for. So again, you got a situation where you got the guy in the backfield who doesn't have the capability of scoring the ball, but that's maybe intentional. The real tragedy in this agenda, the school to prison pipeline scenario, is that research on black children has shown that at birth, not too long after, black children crawl, walk, talk at an earlier age than white children do. So why do we see the disparity and discrepancy in terms of learning outcomes? They're obviously environmental, all the other things we just mentioned. And schools know this, universities know this, and people building prisons know this. There's no way that you can actually catch up. But there are some things that you can do to ensure that there will be better outcomes. And again, that starts with leadership. But that's not going to change unless the agenda changes.